Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. There are literally tens of millions of students, children, who are unable to achieve even a primary or secondary school education. My guest today is someone who's working with a very interesting program to help overcome this problem. My guest today is Ms. Yasmine Sherif. Ms. Yasmine Sherif, a Swedish national, is the director of the Education Cannot Wait program. Yasmine, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you being with me. We're going to get into this very interesting program, Education Cannot Wait, in just a moment, but you work with UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, and UNICEF is hosting this project. In 2 or 3 sentences, what is the basic goal of UNICEF?
Well, UNICEF is one of several UN agencies, and they have a particular advantage and expertise in working for children in emergencies and crises. So that's one of the reasons in helping children who are caught up by armed conflict and natural disasters. And that's one of the reasons that UNICEF is currently hosting Education Cannot Wait, which is a global fund for education to children and young people affected by crisis and natural disasters. But we cater to the whole international system. So different UN agencies are recipients of the funding, NGOs, and we're working very close with governments in crisis as well.
And I think of all the panoply of UN agencies, the alphabet soup, UNICEF is probably the best known of all the agencies out there. Not to say that the others are lesser known in some cases, but UNICEF is very well known. A lot of it has to do with Trick or Treat for UNICEF and other programs and the maternal child health care programs you operate and on across the board. Well, we're going to get into the program. I promise we're going to get into your Education Cannot Wait. But we just found out, you and I were talking right before the show, that you authored a book, The Case for Humanity, and this was rolled out in 2015. Talk a little bit about The Case for Humanity. It's a very popular book. It's a very important book. It's a very moving book. What is the theme of The Case for Humanity? Well,
The Case for Humanity has come out of my nearly 30 years working in the international arena with people and populations affected by war, conflict, natural disasters, but also working at the UN headquarters here in New York, being in the part of the sort of political corridors and seeing the multilateral system from the inside. And I believe in the United Nations as an organization. I think it was a beautiful creation that came out of the Second World War when we suffered so much from the consequences of greed and war and power. So I decided I'll write a book about our humanity and make the scene here at the United Nations Security Council in New York. I brought in all the great leaders of the world like Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Eleanor Roosevelt, and the thinkers and the philosophers, and I placed them in the Security Council. And I said, you're gonna make the case for humanity. I'm a lawyer by training, so I like making my case for things. So let's make the case for humanity and see why it is so important for us today to focus on our humanity as the driving force rather than power and greed. Because it's the power and the greed that has brought us where we are today, but there is a possibility to also achieve our humanity. I think the UN is a good vehicle for that. So they spoke with their own words in my book, and I weave that together with my own experiences on the front line, seeing human beings suffering tremendously because our humanity has been eroded over the past 70 years. And I hope we can reignite it again, and I think it's possible.
It certainly is, yes. It sounds like a very compelling book, and our viewers can go to Amazon.com or the local bookstores, wherever they'd like to take a look at it, or go to the library and pick it up, whatever. But be sure and take a look at The Case for Humanity. Well, that's an excellent entree into what we're going to talk about now. In 2016, the World Humanitarian Summit was held, and first off, what is the World Humanitarian Summit, and how did this Education Cannot Wait concept come out of that summit?
Well, first of all, the World Humanitarian Summit is the very first summit that was brought together the whole world leaders of the world, and non-governmental society, grassroots organizations, United Nations agencies, to come together and say, why have we not succeeded in rescuing countries and populations and refugees affected by armed conflict and natural disasters, humanitarian crisis? A lot lot of money is going in, but the situation is just getting worse. What is that we can change and make it better to bring a closure to conflict and crisis, and also to empower people who are suffering in crisis to also sort of graduate out of their suffering by their own means and be that support mechanism with international solidarity. So they brought together over 5,000 participants over a period of I think, nearly a week to come up with a new thinking. And the outcome of the World Humanitarian Summit was that we need to work together, we have to stop competing, we need to plan for a longer period, not just 1 year humanitarian appeals coming, but actually look at the more from a development perspective. And out of that came education. Today, we have 75 million children and young people in armed conflicts and natural disasters who have their education disrupted, who cannot access quality education. And the consequences will come upon their lives and the rest of us. It will affect all of us.
Exactly. We're starting to reevaluate the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, for example. It was brought online in 1948. You mentioned Eleanor Roosevelt, who played a critical role in getting that through the UN General Assembly. Well, first off, drafting it, then getting it through the General Assembly. But this, today, there are many different types of human rights. Do we view education as we're starting to view health as a human right for everyone on the planet?
Absolutely. First of all, Eleanor Roosevelt was a remarkable, strong woman who really pushed forward for us to adopt the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. So she's really, that's her legacy. Of course, human rights, education is enshrined in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. So it is one of the basic human rights, together with health, the right to housing, and also freedom of expression, freedom of thought, the right to a free and fair trial. So it's one of several human rights there are in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. It also has its own convention. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, the education is mentioned there, and numerous declarations that speaks about the right to education. So it is one of the social, economic and cultural rights that was there in 1948. And now we just have to make reality of that convention and that declaration.
Carry it out.
Yes.
Implement it. Put it into
we have
practice.
to translate our declarations and conventions into reality if they're going to make a difference to the people that we serve. That's so important.
Very, very true. Most assuredly. Well, education cannot wait is a very interesting project. Now, you mentioned 75 million children who are being deprived of their education, right? Elementary and secondary school, maybe even pre-elementary. What of that group, are you going to try to hit all 75 million? What is your target population? What are your target countries? How many would you like? You'd like to reach all of them, I'm sure, but how many can we actually logically reach?
Well, it all depends on financing, because often it's the financing that will determine whether you can help or not. I mean, we all have to be driven, when we deal with conflict and disaster, we all have to be driven by humanitarian imperative, meaning anyone who is in need is our target and the beneficiary. We can't start saying, well, we're not going to look after those, but we're going to take care of them. Then we start discriminating between people. So that's not possible. So our target is clearly the 75 million children and young people, adolescents and the children. And if we can mobilize 8.5 billion by 2030, which is the end of the Sustainable Development Goals target, which means health, education, and a number of other development goals. If we can mobilize and deliver education against $8.5 billion, we can reach all the 75 million children. So it's a matter of political will and the financial means to do so. And we live in a world where we have 78 trillion in world gross national products in total. So if you have 78 trillion out there circulating, and we can just access just over 10%, 12-13%, we can make it happen. We can educate all these children, and education is so important for peace, stability, and a sense of justice in this world.
And it's a matter of priorities also, excuse me, to devote that money to that. I know in the past we've heard debates over, I can't remember the statistics exactly, but it just says what it costs to build a nuclear submarine. You could educate every child on the planet. That is how little it would cost. We see every year nations, and every nation wants to be secure. No problem with that. They want to have their defensive mechanisms and put money into defense, but they're spending $1.6 trillion per year. $1 trillion, and in many cases, a lot of that money is just wasted. It's just absolutely, totally wasted. We've seen the Government Accountability Office in the United States said that the Department of Defense here, we'll talk about this country, basically could do with 20 cents on the dollar less. So it's a matter of priorities to a large degree. And of course, hopefully you will get that funding. Now, are you primarily a funding mechanism? You're bringing the partners together to develop the funding and to provide services, or how will that work?
Yeah, let me very quickly, because I think the whole issue of national security is important, because every country wants to have
and they should.
They want to have security, everyone wants their population to live in peace. But what the world has discovered is that if you connect human security and national security, it sort of comes harmoniously together. So if we invest in education, we are addressing the root cause often, not always, but it's a big part of the root cause. And if we educate people rather than keeping them out there without education, being drawn into a whole different sort of negative and unproductive way of the young life, and rather become productive citizens of the world, we are more likely to protect our countries and our people if we make sure that everyone has a chance to be a protective world citizen, productive and positively contributing world citizen. So education is really the most powerful weapon on earth, if I were to quote Mandela. I think it's more powerful to maintain world peace and security than nuclear weapons, if I may say so.
But very true.
I'm a humanist also, and I think it doesn't take much research to see that. Now, yes, we're a global fund for education, and we seek to bring together humanitarian UN agencies and NGOs and grassroots and governments and development actors and private sector. We want to work with private sector companies and the whole segment, the full segment of world citizenry to come together to financially, but also to work together in country across the development humanitarian divide to provide education, quality education, good education through curriculums, teachers that are well trained, schools that are protected so that girls can go to school because they're not worried about being abused or being drawn into trafficking, or boys are protected not to being drawn into armed groups, and have school feeding so that they have the proper nourishment, that they have the focus and concentration to study in school, and also to benefit from modern pedagogy, to learn about universal values, to learn disruptive thinking, debating, learn about human rights, and empower them to go out and be the agents of change for a better world. How beautiful. Children who suffer in conflict and crisis, they have enormous resilience. And if they are given the opportunity to educate themselves, they will be so powerful in a positive way. They will draw on that resilience and those experiences, and they help the rest of us.
That's right. And they will strengthen their society and their community and improve it in the long run.
Yes.
Do you find that most of the 70 million children who are being deprived, are they in conflict zones like Syria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, different places like that? Or are there most of them there and some in other areas? Or how do you define, or how do you determine where they are?
If you look at, first of all, you look at conflict countries. So you have Syria, you have Yemen, you have Afghanistan, Chad, Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo. But then you also have many of those children living in refuge, in refugee camps. So you have in Uganda, you have 1.4 million refugees in Uganda, of whom 50% are children. So they are refugees living in a peaceful country, but their access to education is complicated by language, by also the financial resources. For governments in neighboring countries to cater to their education, they also have to look after their own citizens.
Mm-hmm. Most assuredly, yes. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with any type of media outlet, be it a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps you're with an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just like the show and you'd like to share it with your neighbors, friends, relatives, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided free of charge as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're talking with Ms. Yasmine Sherif with UNICEF and also with the Education Cannot Wait program to focus on how we can assist young people, 70 million or more, get their elementary and secondary educations. Yasmine, we're talking about the 70 million children that we know of that need help at this point. Now, on your website, you had 6, I'm going to make sure I get this right, 5. Your mandate is articulated around 5 particular functions. Why don't we just briefly mention them? One is, start off, the political commitment. I think we've talked about that to some degree.
Yeah.
How important is that?
Oh, it's very important because, first of all, politics is everything that we do, but political commitment means that our member states of the United Nations and world leaders make a commitment that education is probably the most effective way to address contemporary challenges. By educating young girls and boys from the age of at least 5 or 6 and upwards, we can create a better world and make that as the top priority rather than arming up for more nuclear and all that money going into that will eventually just destroy all of us rather than being a productive solution. So you need political commitment for that. And we can see from Education Cannot Wait that we have such great political commitment among some incredible donor partners, governments. And I can say here that the US has contributed over $20 million last year to Education Cannot Wait. We have the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway and Denmark, Canada, the UK, Dubai Cares. We are going to work with more Gulf countries and Germany and the Netherlands, and I cannot afford to forget any one of our great partners. But we see many of them are coming forward and making very bold investments, and even Bulgaria is coming forward now to provide support, and the EU, of course. So we see that is a sign of political commitment, because our second core objective is to raise the financing so we can achieve the target of 3.5 billion in 2021 and 8.5 billion in 2030. So political commitment usually precedes the financial commitment and is directly linked. And now we are, of course, looking to private sector as well to come in. As I said, there is a lot of money out there.
Exactly.
And we can use that money to change the world.
Exactly. Well, we moved through the first 3. Thank you.
Yes.
We got through them very quickly. And then the fourth one is to respond to crises, nationally and locally.
Yeah.
How will you do that?
Well, here it is about respecting that the people that we serve are not people who do not have, that lack resilience, knowledge and expertise. On the contrary, many of the refugees we find in the camps today, or people who are living in the war-torn communities, were once upon a time they were educated. They had a good education. They have knowledge and experience that often is not utilized if you come in with a very immediate humanitarian response and treat them as non-resourceful people. So first of all, they have a lot of knowledge. They also have an understanding of their countries and how to approach solutions. And thirdly, which is so important, that we always say that when you go through some tragedy in life or you go through some pain and suffering, we always say, well, you learn something out of that. You can just imagine all these children going through this tremendous suffering of losing their parents to rockets, losing their family, their friends, their homes. Out of that suffering, if they get education in their hand, they can translate that into an incredible wisdom and understanding that if we give them the education, they can not only rebuild, but they can build back better. So we need to be humble also and learn from them, and that is what local ownership is all about. Give them the chance to lead the recovery effort. But to do so, they need an education.
And that's very true.
Yeah.
The number 5 is to promote accountability, transparency, better data collection, look at what works, what doesn't work. How are you focusing on that?
Well, that's education cannot wait as a global fund. We are not just a pass-through mechanism where we get the money and then we bring together the different agencies like those who are dealing with refugees like the High Commissioner for Refugees or UNRWA or there's so many of them, UNICEF and others, but also to make sure that we work with them in establishing very accountable frameworks for how the money is being used. We use best practices and lessons learned that are evidence-based. So when we see something really working well, like a curriculum has really proven to take girls out of poverty and prevent trafficking or gender-based violence, because now there is a greater awareness of girls' rights, we use it again and again. Or if we see that certain approaches have proven to be sustainable, that education will continue, that we are not just doing fast-tracking short-term interventions and maybe build a model school somewhere where teachers, curriculum, school feeding, everything comes well in together, then let's replicate that. So what works on the ground, let's replicate that. And that is what evidence-based application is. Another one is to use data so that we know what we are doing and the numbers we are dealing with, the impact that failed education has. Use the data, the research and the numbers, and not just randomly distribute funding. So we really, when we go out and work with our partners on the ground, we make sure that we have a very strong framework for delivering that funding, and we monitor implementation and we report on it to all our donors to make sure that they get value for money.
Now, another very well-known agency of the UN system is the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, and part of their mandate is education. How do you folks are separate, obviously, but how do you work with UNESCO? Do you complement one another, or are there any challenges to make sure that they're doing what they're doing in education and you're doing what you're doing in education, or do you work together on projects? How does that operate?
Yeah, let me first say that I have a great admiration for UNESCO. UNESCO is an organization that really has become the beacon of the voice for universal values and the importance of bringing universal values and shared say what we find in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights and the UN Charter, the equality, and to think in the broader perspective of humanity. Really, UNESCO, as they are called in the abbreviation, is really the beacon for that, and I think that is very important. They also work a lot with regulatory frameworks and curriculums and policy frameworks, and they are the guardian in the whole UN system for Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is education, quality education. So it's a very important organization. How do we work and complement? Education cannot wait. We do not deliver education on the ground. We are not an operational agency like the United Nations, UNESCO, or UNRWA, or UNHR, or UNICEF, or Save the Children, or International Rescue Committee, or many of the national agencies and organizations. We are a fund manager that does more than just raise and deliver funding. We go out and bridge the development and humanitarian actors, we raise the political commitment, we engage governments, we engage refugees and displaced communities, and we make everyone work together, and then we improve quality. And we have a very strong expertise in Education Cannot Wait on protection issues, on development, on education, on humanitarian issues. So we bring that expertise and draw on it from the larger Education Cannot Wait family, and we make everyone work together.
That's the way to do it. Well, Yasmine Sherif, it is the beauty of it. And our viewers can go to your website at www.educationcannotwait.org and learn much more about this very interesting project. But I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
It's lovely being here. Thank you to you, and thank you to everybody out there.
Okay. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.